Hello. Welcome to Dan Explains It All. Today we're here to talk about Sunlight. Sunlight is our new reverb pedal. It has 3 new modes that each have their own unique voice, pretty wide set of controls and expression abilities and things like that. The thing that links each mode is something that we like to call dynamic hold. Basically, if you think of the hold switch that exists on our Procession or Dark Star, where you can infinitely maintain a reverb trail, this introduces the idea of grabbing a new note, holding it for as long as it's new, and then letting it fade out when a different new note comes in and holding that. But we'll get into that more later. I just wanted to introduce you to some of the magic right off the bat. So I guess the best way to talk about Sunlight is to listen to Sunlight. Right now you're hearing comb mode, but just for the sake of left to right clarity, let's go into tape mode. First off, the mix control. Classic old blood mix. You turn it all the way down, you have your very familiar dry signal unaffected. Turn it all the way up, only reverb, 100% wet signal. Let's dial it back to about halfway so you can hear what's going on. We call it tape mode because the modulation almost feels like an old tape machine. I mean, it's not really meant to emulate that, but it's basically a kind of lopsided LFO that if you set the rate down, let's set it pretty far down, depth all the way up, you just get these surprise little moments of modulation, almost like the splice of a tape or, whatever you call that thing. Just little blips of movement. We can speed it up and you'll hear it happening more often. Very seasick at this point. So what rate is doing is setting the rate of that modulation, and depth is setting the depth of the modulation, basically the amount of wavering that it can do and how quickly it does it. Now you'll notice that rate and depth apply to each of the 3 modes. So here it's a simple modulation, rate, and depth. So now let's talk about comb mode. Comb mode takes a bass reverb that kind of shares a bit of the voice of the reverb of tape mode and applies 4 stacked delays to that reverb. Rate now becomes a time control, simultaneously controlling the time of all 4 delays, and depth becomes a feedback control. Now, the reason we call it comb is because this can create a comb filter, kind of like a fixed flange. So I'll go ahead and turn depth pretty far up, and I'll bring the rate down. So now you can hear, if I move the rate knob, suddenly it's almost like a flanger pedal. Basically, you can tune to a particular resonance and just have that extra hype, extra something of those frequencies within the reverb trails. Alternatively, you can max the rate knob, and you can hear that now it's this extra echoey, it's a reverb with these little skips that catch your more percussive notes. You can turn depth all the way down, and they only repeat once. Turn depth all the way up, and they almost go out of control, but not quite. It's a fun mode to get lost in. Maybe we'll come back to it later. But for now, let's move on to pass mode. So this is the 3rd mode in Sunlight. And again, each of these is using sort of a similar, very, very long sort of washy reverb. The way that pass interprets it is by actually applying that reverb first, then adding a band pass filter, and then applying the reverb again. So you've got a couple different blocks of reverb with a filter in between them. And that filter is being set by a sample hold, pseudo-random LFO type thing. So now your rate and depth controls become, rate sets the rate at which, or the time between, it skips to new frequencies, and depth controls the range of potential frequencies. If I turn depth all the way down, it'll just fix itself to one thing. If I turn it all the way up, you'll hear it skipping to many different frequencies. I can turn rate all the way up, and it becomes very bubbly and skippy, but because it's between two reverb blocks, you avoid too much extra resonance or, kind of poppy, clicky sound. I can turn rate really far down, and you'll just hear it kind of occasionally blipping, bubbling to new frequencies. Now, one fun trick in pass mode is if I turn rate all the way down, depth now controls the cutoff frequency of the filter directly. So instead of skipping to random ones with the range being set by depth, you just move depth and pick exactly where you want that filter to sit. So right now you hear that it's a very dark reverb. It's just only grabbing low frequencies. You could push it more up into the mids and it becomes this sort of low mid, almost a woofy reverb, but something interesting to put under your guitar. Or I could bring it all the way up to just really accentuate the high frequency information. So this is basically a voice control for the reverb now. Re-engage rate and have some fun with it. So those are the three modes of Sunlight. Those are kind of the three basic voices. You'll notice that so far I haven't touched the decay and input controls, even though those also apply to all three modes. That's because they're directly related to that dynamic hold thing we talked about earlier. So let's get into that. Maybe I'll tell you about it first and then we can hear it. So basically what input is doing is setting the amount of input signal that's allowed to get in. If I turn input all the way down, suddenly you actually won't get anything in the reverb. Turn mix all the way up, no signal. You'll use input to slowly find the point at which your guitar or other instrument signal can enter the reverb. You can set it low so that it sort of dances and occasionally grabs pieces, or you can set it all the way wide open and it'll let everything into the reverb, no problem. Go ahead and dial the mix back a little bit again. Now, decay can be thought of as a feedback control for the reverb. In fact, that's exactly what it is. So all the way down, you have a reverb that can trail off elegantly. It's still a pretty long trail, but you hear it decaying clearly. As you bring it up, it'll take longer to decay because it's recycling the information in the reverb. It takes the output, sends it right back into the input. If I max out decay, suddenly the reverb can go infinitely. And you may notice Brady stopped playing, but the reverb didn't stop going. Brady, you want to hit a new note? That's dynamic hold. We set the input wide open, so it let new information in. And in addition to that, when new information came in, it secretly brought down the decay knobs so that old information was allowed to disappear. So when you introduce a new chord, a new note, a new input signal, it lets the old reverb signal trail out kind of secretly, even if your decay is fully maxed out. And that applies to all three modes. So you play something new, it grabs it, you stop playing, it sustains it. So that's the dynamic hold. It's it's a player and pedal interaction that you have to experiment with, but once it becomes clear, it's just a lot of fun to play around with. So those are all of the sounds in Sunlight. That's what the knobs do, it's what the mode switch does. That's most of what you're going to be interacting with. But you'll also notice there's a second foot switch labeled Alt and an expression input. Let's talk about those. So this Alt foot switch lets you snap to a particular setting. Imagine suddenly turning the rate or depth or decay or input or any combination of those all at once. That's what the Alt foot switch allows you to do. You can think of it as a partial preset almost, because it can't switch modes or change the mix, but it can change a lot all at once. So by default, it's actually going to work as a hold switch, similar to our Procession and Darkstar pedals. So if I've hit the Alt switch, you see the light comes on to show that it's engaged. And now suddenly, Brady can't cut through the reverb because it basically turned the input all the way down and the decay all the way up. And that's how the hold function works on a procession or a dark star. It says no new input, all old input recycling forever. But what if you wanted it to do something different? Let's move into comb mode and have some fun. Let's set all our knobs back to noon first. So I think the best way to approach configuring your alt setting is by setting an intention. So for example, maybe every time I hit the alt switch, I want to hit a particular comb filter point. So I'll find a good resonant frequency on the rate knob and max out my depth or my feedback knob to just hit this particular resonant frequency every time. So now to configure that, I'm going to hold both foot switches down for about 6 seconds or so. You'll notice that the alt LED starts blinking. That tells you you're calibrating your alt settings. So if I don't move a knob, alt will know I don't want that knob to move when I hit the alt foot switch. If I do move a knob, it'll see exactly where I put it and assign that once we exit. So let's start moving knobs. Let me find a fun resonant frequency. I'll go ahead and max out the depth so we can really hear it. Yeah, that's a fun one. So I want alt to go right there every time. So I'm going to hold both foot switches again for about 6 seconds until the alt LED stops blinking. So now we're ready to go. I'll go ahead and put my rate and depth back to noon. Got all knobs at noon. And we should be able to just snap right to that resonance. That's the alt foot switch. Sudden motions of anywhere between 1 and 4 knobs. Now let's talk about the expression input. So what do we want to do with our expression setting? Let's go back to that tape mode, our modulation. And what if we just wanted to modulate the rate? So again, it can be assigned to rate, depth, decay, and input, any combination of all 4 of those, but let's just work with the rate to do a simple setting. So instead of holding down both foot switches, I'm just going to hold down the bypass foot switch for about the same amount of time until the on-off LED starts blinking. There we go. So again, this is assignable to rate, depth, decay, and input. And when the LED is blinking at this rate, you are setting the heel or the down position of your expression control. So I want to just do a slow rate, let's say. I'll go ahead and max out the depth so I can really hear it. Okay, I like that. To assign the next expression setting, which is the toe or all the way up position, I hold the foot switch again, and you'll see the bypass LED start blinking faster. There we go. So now, if I don't move a knob, Sunlight will know not to assign it to expression. So even though I moved the depth control earlier, as long as I don't move it here, it will keep it from being affected by expression. All I want to do is speed up the rate. And we're gonna keep the range of it pretty limited so it doesn't get too wild at that full depth. To lock in that expression setting, hold that bypass foot switch one more time until the LED goes back to its previous on-off state. Cool. So now let's plug in the expression ramper and see what we can do. I'm gonna set my A all the way down so that'll match our heel position. Then I'll set my B all the way up so that'll match our toe position. Let's set the rate to, I don't know, let's say new. Do triangle mode and get it moving. I'll bring the depth down just a hair. You can hear that now the rate is even less predictable than before, the rate of that kind of tape-like warble. As you try to track exactly when it's going to turn, when the pitch will move up or the pitch will move down. You can't quite do it because the rate is just slowly shifting between slow and slower. It's one of the less obvious things that you can do with the expression setup of Sunlight, but there's just a certain magic to it that I really like. So there's all kinds of stuff you can assign to the expression control. I'll go ahead and stop the expression ramper. Suddenly the modulation seems so bland almost. So that's it. That's Sunlight. A 3-mode reverb, 5 knobs, dynamic hold functionality, an alt foot switch, expression control. Actually, one thing on that alt foot switch that I forgot to tell you about is that you can also use it as a momentary or latching thing. In fact, now that we know about expression and the alt foot switch and how they can be assigned separately and used in interesting ways, let's do something. Follow along. I'm going to widen out the range of my expression settings. So, got the on-off LED blinking. We're going to bring the rate pretty far down. So that was our heel position, you'll remember. Now the LED is blinking faster. It's time to set toe position. Let's make the rate really high. Hold the bypass foot switch one more time to lock in that setting. Let's see where we are. We'll max out the depth, get our ramper moving, full range again. Yeah. So now it's moving between a very fast rate and a very slow rate with the depth maxed out. But that max depth can get pretty silly. So we can dial it back to be more subtle. But what if you just wanted to momentarily push it into that kind of wacky territory? Let's assign our depth control to the alt foot switch. Again, holding both for about 6 seconds until our alt LED starts blinking. And then I just turn that depth knob all the way up, and that way the alt foot switch knows when you hit me, I'm going to send the depth knob all the way up. Hold both foot switches again to lock that in. Exit out of alt and bring our depth down. Very subtle, slow warble all the way up to and almost kind of just a soft vibrato that's fast but not so deep that it's goofy. And if I just wanted to give it a little momentary burst of kind of Nintendo-y depth, I hold the alt foot switch for as long as I want that, and then let go, and then it'll return to the previous setting. There's a lot of ways you can use that. You can do little momentary holds that aren't dynamic, or you could, do that comb filter thing we did earlier, and just quickly, a little burst of that, and then come back to your normal setting. Just a fun little way of interacting with the expression, the momentary alt foot switch, expression ramper, moving the expression value consistently. There's a lot that can be done here. Okay. That's Sunlight. Uses 9-volt center negative DC power. It's about 80 milliamps or so current draw. Soft touch foot switches, true bypass when it's off. Lots of fun reverb when it's on. It's available now from us and our worldwide dealer network. If you have any questions, get in touch. Thanks.